INFJs don't choose to feel what other people feel. Their brain does it for them, before they are even aware it is happening. You walk into a room and something shifts. Not because anything was said, not because anything obvious happened. Just, the air changed. Someone in the room is carrying something, and within 60 seconds you are carrying it too. You feel the anxiety before the anxious person speaks. You feel the tension between two people who are performing normalcy for everyone else. You feel the grief underneath someone's smile before they have given you a single reason to look for it. And you do not know how to explain this to people who do not experience it, because from the outside it looks like sensitivity or intuition or being in tune with people. But from the inside, it does not feel like a skill. It feels like something that happens to you, something that arrives without permission and does not leave until you have processed it completely. You absorb other people's emotional states the way a sponge absorbs water, not because you decided to, not because you are trying to, but because that is simply what your system does when it encounters another human being in a state of feeling. Most people who know this about themselves call it empathy. Some call it being an empath. A few have read about HSP, highly sensitive person, and recognized themselves in it. But very few people have ever had it explained to them at the level of what is actually happening inside the brain and the nervous system when this occurs. Not the experience of it, you already know the experience, but the mechanism, the biology, the specific neurological and psychological processes that produce this absorption automatically, and why those processes are significantly more active in INFJs than in the general population. Because once you understand the mechanism, two things change. You stop experiencing your own empathy as something that happens to you, and starts experiencing it as something you can understand and work with. And you stop wondering if something is wrong with you for feeling this way. Here is what changes when you understand the brain chemistry behind this. You stop trying to fix it, because you realize it is not broken. The system working overtime is the same system that makes you extraordinarily good at understanding people, at reading situations accurately, at being present with someone in pain in a way that actually reaches them. The problem was never the system. The problem was never having the information to manage it. This video gives you that information. If this channel goes deeper into the INFJ experience than anything else you have found, subscribe, because this is exactly what we do here every single video. Let's get into it. Mirror neurons, the brain mechanism that makes emotional absorption automatic. In the mid-1990s, a group of neuroscientists in Italy made a discovery that changed how we understand human connection. They were studying motor neurons in macaque monkeys, neurons that fired when the monkey performed a specific action. What they found by accident was that the same neurons fired when the monkey simply observed another individual performing the same action. The monkey was not moving, it was watching, and its brain was responding as if it were the one doing the thing it was watching. These neurons became known as mirror neurons, and the implications of that discovery extend far beyond motor behavior into the core of human emotional experience. Mirror neurons are present in the human brain, and they operate across multiple domains, not just physical action but emotional state. When you witness someone experiencing a strong emotion, fear, grief, joy, pain, your mirror neuron system activates the same neural pathways that would activate if you were experiencing that emotion yourself. You do not just observe the emotion. Your brain simulates it. It runs a version of that emotional experience internally as a way of understanding what the other person is going through. For most people, this simulation is partial. It produces understanding, recognition, a degree of felt resonance with the other person's state. It is the neurological basis of empathy in its standard form. The person feels something, you register it, you understand it with some degree of interior reference. This is normal human empathy, and it is genuinely valuable. For INFJs, and for people with highly sensitive nervous systems more broadly, the mirror neuron system appears to operate with significantly higher activation. The simulation is not partial, it is full. The INFJ does not just register the other person's emotional state. They run the complete interior version of it. The grief does not just register as grief in them. It lands in the INFJ's body as grief in me. The anxiety does not just read as their anxiety. It is experienced as my anxiety. The emotional boundary between self and other becomes functionally permeable in a way that most people never experience. This is not a metaphor. This is a neurological reality. The INFJ's brain is running other people's emotional experiences through its own system, automatically, involuntarily, and with a degree of completeness that makes the distinction between absorbed emotion and personal emotion genuinely difficult to maintain without specific, practiced strategies for doing so. The highly sensitive nervous system, why the INFJ's volume cannot be turned down. Beyond mirror neurons, the INFJ experience of emotional absorption is shaped by the broader sensitivity of their nervous system as a whole. Research by psychologist Elaine Aron identified a trait she called high sensitivity, present in approximately 15 to 20% of the population, characterized by deeper processing of sensory and emotional information, greater awareness of subtleties in the environment, and a stronger physiological response to both positive and negative stimuli. INFJs consistently score at the extreme end of this trait, and understanding what that means at a neurological level explains a great deal about why the INFJ experiences the world the way they do. The highly sensitive nervous system does not filter incoming information the way an average nervous system does. Most people's brains apply a threshold. Information below a certain intensity level is processed at a low priority, background level. The high sensitivity nervous system does not apply the same threshold. More information gets through, more of it gets processed at depth, more of it produces a physiological response. This is why the INFJ notices things other people miss. The slight change in someone's tone, the micro-expression that lasted half a second, the shift in the energy of a room that happened before anything observable changed. The nervous system is collecting and processing all of it in real time. Applied to emotional information specifically, this means the INFJ is receiving a higher volume of emotional data from their environment at any given moment, processing it at greater depth, and producing a stronger internal response to it than most people do. Walk into a room where two people are in conflict but performing normalcy. The average nervous system catches the performance and accepts it. The INFJ nervous system catches the performance and the conflict underneath it simultaneously. And the conflict does not just register intellectually, it registers in the body as tension, as discomfort, as a felt sense of something being wrong that the INFJ cannot always immediately source. This is not a choice. It is not something that can be switched off through an act of will. The volume on the INFJ's sensory and emotional processing system is set significantly higher than average, and understanding that the system itself is operating exactly as it was built to operate, not malfunctioning, not being oversensitive in a pathological sense, but processing at a level that is genuinely different from the norm, is the beginning of a different relationship with what it produces. Emotional contagion, how feelings spread between people like a signal. There is a well-documented psychological phenomenon called emotional contagion. The process by which one person's emotional state transfers to another through a combination of nonverbal cues, physiological mirroring, and unconscious behavioral synchronization. It happens between all human beings to some degree. It is the reason a laughing room makes you feel lighter, even when you do not know what the joke was. The reason sitting with someone who is genuinely calm produces a calming effect in your own nervous system. The reason a tense meeting leaves everyone in the building feeling the tension even if they were not in the room. Emotional contagion operates through multiple channels simultaneously. Facial expression is one. Research consistently shows that people unconsciously mirror the facial expressions of those they are with, and that the physical act of mirroring produces the associated emotional state in the person doing the mirroring. Body posture and movement are another. Unconscious postural mirroring activates the same neural pathways as the state being mirrored. Vocal tone, pacing, rhythm, All of these carry emotional information that transfers between people without either person making a conscious decision to send or receive it. For the INFJ, all of these channels are operating at heightened sensitivity simultaneously. The INFJ is unconsciously mirroring facial expression, posture, and vocal quality at a higher rate and with greater fidelity than average, which means they are producing, in their own nervous system, a more complete version of the emotional states they are around. They are not just receiving the signal, they are running the full simulation. What makes this particularly complex for the INFJ is the speed at which it happens. Emotional contagion in a highly sensitive person is not a slow, gradual process of being worn down by someone else's emotional state over an extended interaction. It is nearly instantaneous. The INFJ walks into a space and within seconds, their nervous system has already begun adjusting to the emotional environment. By the time they are consciously aware of what is happening, if they become consciously aware at all, the absorption is already complete. They are already carrying what the room was carrying. And the critical skill, the one most INFJs were never taught, is how to identify what belongs to them and what they picked up from somewhere else. The cortisol problem, what chronic emotional absorption does to the INFJ body over time. Emotional absorption is not just a psychological experience, it is a physiological one. And when it happens chronically, when the INFJ is spending significant portions of their daily life absorbing and processing other people's emotional states without sufficient recovery time, it produces measurable effects in the body that go well beyond feeling tired or emotionally drained. The primary mechanism is cortisol, the hormone the body produces in response to stress. When the INFJ absorbs someone else's anxiety, fear, grief, or anger, their nervous system does not only register these as emotional data, it registers them as stressors. And in response to stressors, the body produces cortisol. This is the same response the body produces to actual personal stress. Because from the nervous system's perspective, the absorbed emotional state and the personal emotional state are processed through the same pathways. The body does not distinguish between my anxiety and anxiety I absorbed from someone else. It responds to both as if they are real and present threats. For the average person, this cortisol response is relatively contained. It arises in response to personal stressors and returns to baseline when the stressor passes. For the INFJ, who is absorbing multiple people's emotional states across an ordinary day, the cortisol response is being triggered repeatedly by stimuli that originate outside themselves, often without any natural resolution point, because the absorbed emotions do not have the clear beginning and end that personal emotions do. Over time, chronically elevated cortisol produces specific physical consequences. Sleep disruption, because the nervous system is still processing absorbed emotional data during what should be rest time. Immune suppression, because sustained cortisol elevation suppresses immune function. Cognitive fatigue, because the depth of processing required by a highly sensitive nervous system is genuinely metabolically expensive. Heightened anxiety as a baseline state, because the system that was designed to return to calm after a stressor never fully returns to calm when the stressors are continuous and largely invisible. This is why many INFJs carry a level of physical fatigue that does not respond to ordinary rest. They are not just tired from their day, they are tired from everyone else's day too. And until the source of that specific fatigue is understood, the recovery strategies being applied will always fall short of what the situation actually requires. The boundary dissolution problem, why INFJs lose track of where they end and others begin. One of the most disorienting consequences of chronic emotional absorption is the gradual erosion of the felt boundary between the INFJ's own emotional state and the emotional states they have absorbed from others. This is not a metaphor about losing yourself in relationships, though that happens too. It is a literal perceptual problem that affects the INFJ's ability to accurately identify what they are feeling and where that feeling came from. When you absorb emotions at the rate and depth the INFJ absorbs them, And when this happens continuously across an ordinary day, the emotional landscape inside you at any given moment is a mixture. Some of what you feel is yours, generated by your own experience, your own thoughts, your own responses to your own life. Some of what you feel was absorbed from the people you were around this morning, or this week, or from the accumulated emotional residue of a difficult relationship that you are still processing. And without a practiced ability to distinguish between these sources, all of it just feels like how you feel, like your emotional state, like you. This creates specific problems. The INFJ, who cannot distinguish their own emotions from absorbed ones, makes decisions based on incomplete information about themselves. They may feel anxious without knowing the anxiety is residue from someone else's nervous system, rather than a signal about their own situation. They may feel sad without knowing the sadness was picked up in a conversation rather than generated from within. They may interpret absorbed emotional states as personal emotional truths, building beliefs about themselves and their lives on feelings that were never theirs to begin with. The practice that addresses this directly is one that most INFJs have never been taught: the deliberate, regular habit of emotional sourcing. Not just identifying what you feel, but asking specifically, where did this come from? When did I first notice this feeling? Was I with someone when it appeared? Does it have a quality that feels like mine, with my specific texture, my specific narrative attached? Or does it feel like something that arrived from outside and settled? The INFJ who develops this practice stops building their inner life on borrowed emotions. And that clarity, knowing what is actually yours, is one of the most stabilizing things a highly absorptive nervous system can develop. Why some people drain the INFJ instantly. The neuroscience of energy vampires. Most INFJs have experienced this with specific people in their lives. You spend an hour with a particular person, and you leave feeling like something was extracted from you. Not just tired, specifically depleted in a way that takes longer to recover from than ordinary social interaction. You cannot always explain why this person costs more than others. They may not be unkind, they may not be dramatic, they may just be a lot. And the interaction, which looked ordinary from the outside, leaves you needing to sit in silence for an extended period just to return to baseline. There is a neurological explanation for this, and it is more specific than the general concept of draining people. Research on interpersonal neurobiology shows that human nervous systems in close proximity actually synchronize. They begin to regulate each other's physiological states through a process called co-regulation. When two people are in emotional attunement, their heart rate variability, cortisol levels, and neural oscillation patterns begin to align. This is the biological basis of feeling calmed by a calm person or energized by an energized person. For the INFJ, whose nervous system is both highly sensitive and highly absorptive, this synchronization process happens more completely and more rapidly than in most people, which means the INFJ's nervous system does not just receive emotional information from others, it actively attempts to co-regulate with them. It moves toward alignment, and when the other person's nervous system is dysregulated, chronically anxious, emotionally volatile, energetically demanding, the INFJ's system expends significant resources attempting to achieve synchronization with a state that cannot be stabilized. The people who drain the INFJ fastest are not necessarily the most negative or the most difficult in obvious ways. They are the people whose nervous systems are most dysregulated, whose internal state has the least stability and therefore makes the greatest demand on the INFJ's co-regulation process. The interaction costs more because the INFJ's system is working harder to find equilibrium with something that keeps moving away from it. Knowing this changes how the INFJ manages their energy around specific people, not by withdrawing from everyone who costs something, but by understanding that the cost is physiological, not personal, and that protecting their nervous system is not avoidance, it is maintenance. How the INFJ can work with their brain chemistry instead of being run by it. Everything described in this video points to the same conclusion. The INFJ's emotional absorption system is not a malfunction. It is a feature, a specific neurological configuration that produces extraordinary capacity for empathy, for reading people accurately, for being genuinely present with someone in pain in a way that reaches them. The problem has never been the system itself. The problem has been operating the system without understanding it, without the tools to manage what it produces, without a framework for working with the brain chemistry rather than being overwhelmed by it. The first practical tool is what was described in the previous point: emotional sourcing. The daily or twice daily practice of checking in with your emotional state and asking where each significant feeling originated, not as a lengthy process, as a brief, honest inventory. What am I feeling right now, and is this mine? Over time, this practice rebuilds the internal boundary that chronic absorption erodes. It gives the INFJ back their own emotional baseline as a stable reference point. The second tool is deliberate physiological recovery, not just rest, but the specific kind of input that actively downregulates a highly sensitive nervous system. Silence is one. Not background noise silence, but genuine, complete quiet that gives the nervous system a break from processing environmental input. Nature exposure is another. Research consistently shows that natural environments produce measurable cortisol reduction in sensitive nervous systems faster than most other recovery modalities. Physical movement that is rhythmic and non-competitive, walking, swimming, activates the parasympathetic nervous system and assists in clearing the cortisol load that accumulated from a day of emotional absorption. The third tool is intentional exposure management, not avoidance. The INFJ cannot and should not try to stop engaging with people, but conscious decisions about how much high absorption contact is sustainable in a given period, and building in recovery time as a non-negotiable, rather than a luxury that happens when everything else is handled. The nervous system that gets regular maintenance performs at a level that chronic depletion never allows. The INFJ who understands their own brain chemistry stops experiencing their empathy as something that happens to them. They start experiencing it as something they carry, deliberately, sustainably, with enough self-knowledge to give it fully without losing themselves in the giving. That is the whole shift, and it starts with understanding exactly what is happening inside you when you walk into a room and the room walks into you. 7 layers of the actual science behind what the INFJ experiences every single day. Mirror neurons running full simulations, a highly sensitive nervous system with no standard filter, emotional contagion happening faster than conscious thought, cortisol accumulating from stress that was never even yours, boundaries dissolving between your emotions and everyone else's, specific people triggering a co-regulation process that costs you more than you knew, and practical tools for working with a system that was never broken, just never properly understood. You are not too sensitive, you are not weak, you are running a more complex emotional processing system than most people will ever understand from the inside. The work is not simplifying that system. The work is learning to run it without it running you. Brainy Quiet Mind. Subscribe. Share this with someone who has spent their whole life absorbing the world without knowing why. One question for the comments. Can you remember a specific moment when you realized the emotion you were feeling was not actually yours? And what did it feel like when you figured out where it came from?